I took a submarine to the bottom of the ocean and discovered a secret government experiment. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. As a marine biologist, I had always been fascinated by the mysteries of the ocean. So when the government approached me with the chance to pilot a deep-sea submarine to the bottom of the ocean, I couldn't resist. The mission was to explore an uncharted region of the ocean floor that was rumored to be teeming with new species of marine life. But when I arrived at the government research facility, I quickly realized that there was more to this mission that met the eye. As I descended deeper and deeper into the abyss, the darkness outside the sub grew more and more oppressive. The only light came from the sub's headlights, which illuminated the swirling clouds of sediment that surrounded me. But then, something strange started to happen. The water outside the sub began to glow with an eerie green light. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but as I drew closer, I could see that the glow was coming from a massive structure on the ocean floor. As I approached the structure, I could see that it was a complex of interconnected buildings and tunnels that stretched for miles in every direction. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were people down there, dozens of them, moving about in the tunnels like ants. But these weren't ordinary people. They were dressed in strange, futuristic uniforms and carrying all sorts of high-tech equipment. I tried to make contact with them on the radio, but there was no response. And then, just as I was about to move on, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. There was a creature down there, a creature unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was massive, easily 20 feet long, with translucent skin that glowed with the same eerie green light as the structures around it. But what really caught my attention were the wires and tubes that were attached to the creature's body. It was like it was hooked up to some sort of life support system. That's when I knew that this wasn't just some research station. This was a secret government experiment, and they were using this creature for something that they didn't want the world to know about. I tried to get closer to the creature, but my sub's engines were too loud, and it quickly swam away. And then, just as I was turning to leave, I heard a voice in my earpiece. It was a government official ordering me to turn around and leave immediately. They said that I had stumbled upon a classified operation, and that if I didn't leave right away, they would be forced to take drastic measures. I didn't know what to do. I had just discovered something incredible, something that could change the world. But I knew that if I didn't leave, I could be putting myself in danger. Reluctantly, I turned my sub around and started to ascend towards the surface. But as I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just uncovered something truly terrifying. What else were they hiding down there in the depths of the ocean? And what would happen if their experiments were ever revealed to the world? As I breached the surface of the water, I knew that I would never forget what I had seen, and that, no matter what the government might say, I would continue to search for the truth, no matter how deep it might be buried. After returning from the mission, I couldn't shake off the images of what I had seen. I knew I had stumbled upon something that the government had wanted to keep hidden, and it was eating me up inside. I couldn't concentrate on my work, and my colleagues noticed that something was off with me. I couldn't tell them what I had discovered, and I felt isolated and alone with this knowledge. But then, one day, I received an anonymous message. It was an invitation to a secret meeting, and the message claimed that there were others who had discovered the same thing as me. I was hesitant at first, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to attend the meeting. When I arrived, I was surprised to see that there were other scientists and researchers there, all with the same haunted look in their eyes that I had been carrying around with me. We all shared our stories, and it soon became apparent that the government was conducting secret experiments at the bottom of the ocean, experiments that went against ethical and moral codes. The government was using this technology to create living weapons to be used in warfare, and the creatures were not just animals but had been genetically modified to be more lethal and indestructible. The more I learned, the more I realized the danger of the government's experiments. If these creatures got loose, it would be catastrophic. I knew we had to do something, so we formed a team to gather evidence of the experiments and expose them to the world. We used our knowledge and resources to investigate and document everything we could. The mission was not without its dangers. We were constantly being watched and monitored by the government, but we were determined to expose the truth and stop these experiments before it was too late. It took us months of careful planning and gathering evidence, but we finally had enough to blow the lid off the whole operation. We went to the press and exposed the secret government experiments. The news caused a stir worldwide. People were horrified by the government's secret experiments, and the government was forced to dismantle the entire operation. I felt a sense of relief knowing that we had done the right thing, but I also knew that there were probably more secret operations like this one that we hadn't discovered yet. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had made a difference, and it was all thanks to that fateful journey to the bottom of the ocean. However, our victory was short-lived. A few weeks after the news broke, strange things began to happen. Our phones were tapped, our emails were being monitored, and we noticed that we were being followed. It became clear that the government was not going to let us get away with exposing their secrets. We knew that we were in danger and had to be careful, but it was too late. One night, I received a mysterious phone call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end of the line was deep and menacing. "We warned you," it said. "Now, you and your friends will pay the price." The call ended abruptly, and I knew that something terrible was about to happen. I immediately tried to contact my colleagues, but no one answered their phones. The next day, I received the news that all of my friends who had been with me on the submarine had died under mysterious circumstances. The cause of their deaths was unknown, but I knew that it was no coincidence. They had been silenced by the government. I was the only one left alive, and I knew that I was next. I had to disappear and go into hiding to protect myself. I had to leave everything behind, my job, my family, and my life, and start a new one. I knew that I could never stop looking over my shoulder, that I could never be truly safe, but I had to keep going. I had to keep the truth alive, and never let the government's secret experiments be forgotten. Years went by, and I had almost given up hope of ever being able to live a normal life again. But one day, I received a letter in the mail. It was a letter of apology from the government, admitting to their wrongdoings and asking for forgiveness. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It seemed too good to be true, and I knew that it was a trap. But the more I read, the more I realized that the government was serious. They had been exposed, and they knew that they could never go back to their old ways. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. The government had finally taken responsibility for their actions, and I could finally rest easy knowing that my friends had not died in vain. But there would always be a part of me that would never forget the horrors that I had seen at the bottom of the ocean and the price that we had paid for exposing the truth. Years passed, and life went on. I had moved to a small coastal town, hoping to forget the past and start anew. I had made some new friends, and I even started dating someone. But one day, while I was walking along the beach, I stumbled upon something that would change everything. It was a small, metallic object that was half buried in the sand. As I dug it out, I realized that it was some kind of device. Something that I had never seen before. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take it home to examine it more closely. As I was studying the device, I noticed something strange. It seemed to be emitting a strange signal, something that was beyond my understanding. And then, suddenly, it stopped. But that was only the beginning. Over the next few days, I noticed that strange things were happening around me. The lights flickered, strange noises came from the walls, and I had the feeling that I was being watched. I knew that something was not right, and I started to suspect that the government was behind it. They must have planted the device to spy on me, to make sure that I was not going to expose them again. I knew that I had to act fast, but I didn't know what to do. I couldn't call the police or anyone else, as I didn't have any proof of what was happening. But then I remembered the device. I knew that it had to be the key to everything. So I started to examine it more closely, trying to figure out what it did. And then I finally discovered the truth. The device was not just a spying tool, but it was also a transmitter sending a signal deep into the ocean. It was then that I realized what the government had been doing all these years. They had not stopped their secret experiments. They had just moved them to a different location deep in the ocean, away from prying eyes. And they had been using the creatures they had created as a secret weapon, one that no one knew about. I knew that I had to act fast. I couldn't let the government get away with this, so I contacted the same group of scientists and researchers that I had worked with years ago. We put our heads together and we came up with a plan to expose the government's new secret experiments. It was risky, and we knew that we were putting our lives on the line, but we had to do it. We went public with our findings, and once again, the government was forced to admit to their wrongdoings. But this time, things were different. The government had gone too far, and the world was not willing to forgive and forget. The creatures they had created were too dangerous and they had to be destroyed. And so, the government was forced to shut down their secret experiments for good. But the memories of what I had seen, what I had discovered, would never leave me. I had seen the true face of evil, and I knew that I would never be able to forget it. In the aftermath of the government's secret experiments, my life changed once again. I became known as the whistleblower who had exposed the government's darkest secrets. The media was constantly hounding me, trying to get an exclusive interview or statement, but I had had enough of the spotlight. I retreated into solitude, seeking refuge in the wilderness. I purchased a small cabin in the mountains and began living off the grid. It was a simple life, one without the distractions of technology and media, but it was also a life of isolation and loneliness. Despite my efforts to move on from the past, I found myself haunted by nightmares and memories of the creatures I had seen at the bottom of the ocean. They were unlike anything I had ever seen before, with their grotesque appearance and terrifying abilities. The thought that such monstrosities had been created by humans filled me with horror. One night, as I was sitting by the fireplace, I heard a knock at the door. I was surprised, as I rarely had visitors in this remote location. I hesitated before opening the door, but eventually I did. Standing before me was a man in a suit. He had an air of authority about him, and I could tell that he was not here on a social visit. He introduced himself as an agent of the government and asked me to come with him. At first, I refused. I had no desire to be dragged back into the world of secrets and lies, but the man was persistent, and he eventually convinced me to come with him. We traveled to a secret location deep underground. It was a bunker filled with technology and equipment that was beyond anything I had ever seen. The man led me to a laboratory where I saw something that made my blood run cold. In front of me was a tank filled with water. Inside the tank was a creature, one that looked almost identical to the ones I had seen at the bottom of the ocean. It was alive, and it was staring back at me with cold, calculating eyes. The man explained that the creature had been captured by the government, and they were studying it to try and replicate its abilities. They hoped to harness its powers and use them for their own gain. I was horrified. It was clear that the government had not learned its lesson. They were still conducting secret experiments, still trying to play God. I knew that I had to stop them once and for all. I began to work with a small group of individuals dedicated to exposing the government's latest atrocities. We dug deep, gathering evidence and information about the government's newest experiments. We knew that it would be dangerous, but we were determined to put an end to it. Eventually, we were able to gather enough evidence to go public with our findings. The world was shocked, but this time, the government knew they could not deny it. They shut down their experiments once again, and this time, they promised that they would never resume them. But I knew better. I knew that the government would never stop, that they would always be trying to push the boundaries of science and technology regardless of the consequences. It was up to people like me to keep an eye on them, to make sure that they did not go too far. And so, my life continued as a vigilante of sorts, keeping watch over the government's actions and exposing their secrets whenever necessary. It was a lonely and dangerous life, but it was also one that was necessary for the safety of the world. Years went by, and I continued my solitary existence, always keeping a close eye on the government's activities. But as time passed, I began to feel a growing sense of unease. It seemed that no matter how much I exposed and how much I fought, the government always found a way to continue its experiments in secret. One day, I received a message from an old friend who was still working within the government. They told me about a new project that was being developed, one that was even more dangerous than any of the previous ones. They urged me to act quickly before it was too late. I knew that I couldn't take on this mission alone. I needed help, and so I reached out to the same group of individuals who had helped me before. They were hesitant at first, knowing the dangers involved, but eventually they agreed to join me. We began to gather information about the new project, and what we found was even more disturbing than we had anticipated. The government had been developing a new type of weapon, one that was capable of causing mass destruction on a global scale. We knew that we had to act fast, but we also knew that the government was not going to let us interfere so easily. We prepared ourselves for the battle ahead, knowing that it might be our last. We infiltrated the facility where the weapon was being developed, and what we saw there was beyond our worst nightmares. The weapon was not just a bomb, as we had expected, but a virus that could be spread through the air, infecting and killing millions of people. We had to act fast. We tried to destroy the weapon, but we were caught in the act. The government guards surrounded us, and a vicious fight broke out. In the end, we managed to destroy the weapon, but not without paying a heavy price. Many of my friends were killed, and I was captured by the government. I was taken to a secret prison where I was subjected to torture and interrogation, but I refused to reveal anything, even under extreme duress. I knew that the fate of the world was at stake, and I was willing to give my life to protect it. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. I lost track of time, and I began to feel as though I had been forgotten by the world. But one day, something changed. The door to my cell opened, and a man in a suit walked in. He introduced himself as a representative of the government, and told me that they had decided to release me. I was shocked but also relieved. I knew that I had to get out of there as quickly as possible before they changed their minds. I was given a small amount of money and released into the world. But I knew that I could never go back to my old life, that the government would always be watching me, and so I disappeared into the shadows, becoming a ghost, a legend, a story that was whispered in the darkest corners of the world. Thank you to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan, Tacy, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I look forward to making more content for everyone.